The following is a preview of the New Models podcast.
From Berlin to your block since 2018.
Full episodes are available only to subscribers, and there's hundreds more in our archive.
Join now on newmodels.substack.com or patreon.com/newmodels.
And you know the New Models Discord is popping. Patreon only. Stop sleeping and subscribe now.
New Models, you won't get it anywhere else.
New Models Talkcore.
Talkcore.
It's talk, but it's also core. Blah, blah, blah.
It seems everyone is talking about Talkcore.
Would you like more Talkcore?
It's Talkcore from New Models.
Sometimes, lately, on this podcast, we speak as if the human content layer is so compromised it doesn't even exist in a one-to-one human relation anymore. But that's not actually true. We take that stance sometimes as a provocation to expand the ways that we think about media, to get us thinking outside of content. But all the time, at the same time, this primary layer does still exist. And we, Julian and I, and I'm guessing all of you listening, do personally engage with it a lot, have strong feelings about it. One of our favorite artists working in this register is Steven Warwick, aka Heatsick. He's a returning guest and longtime friend of New Models. Full disclosure, he literally married us during COVID among 2,000-year-old ruins along the Turkish coast. He's a writer, a critic, an actor, a musician, a playwright, and a consummately interesting, I actually had deviant, that felt weird, devious mind, all of the above, I think. The last time he came on...
it's both.
Both.
Devious and deviant.
Devious and deviant, exactly. The last time he came on the show was to discuss his long-form essay book, Notes on Evil, which was it 4 years ago now, 2022?
Yeah, 2022.
So crazy. Time, what is it? The first time he came on New Models was actually way back in 2018 when we first started the podcast. He was one of our very first guests.
Third episode, I think.
Third episode.
Psytrance and
synth and bass lines.
Synth and bass lines.
Which was, I think the aim of that podcast was to talk about the bureaucratization of culture under platform capitalism.
Ah, yeah.
If I remember.
Gender.
Yeah, and specifically it was sort of like the bureaucratization of, how do you say that word? The bureaucratization, yeah, of queer culture in particular, and how that changes our daily experience of it. Like in the online space, it was taking on these certain qualities. I just remember Steven saying Bestätigung.
Yes.
And like every time I think of that word, which in German means confirmation, I think of Steven. But like how there was this need to, whereas the idea of queerness had been about getting outside of the lines, suddenly there was a way where you had to like check boxes. He joins us here to speak about two recent music releases. One on Pan Records, live at Café Oto, that came out in March, and the other on Huntleys Palmers, April 22nd. And he's here also to weigh in on the state of the world more generally. So, Steven Warwick, welcome back to New Models.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, good to see you both.
It's really nice to have you in the room.
Yeah.
Well, so these two releases, maybe let's start by chatting about these, because I feel like a lot of what we've done on the New Models podcast over the past several months has been really analyzing how we communicate, what happened to the content layer, like really abstracting that, really trying to think outside of that register. But like at the same time, as I said, like stuff is happening on that level. And my question is kind of like, as somebody who's completely aware of the media environment and who's an analyst of how culture flows through it, what is the experience right now of making art on the one-to-one relation? Not necessarily at a protocol layer, but like at the human layer.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've seen this rise again of playing live, but also a listening event or a playback or, you know, the rise of a listening bar. Yeah, I just felt like when you have these listening bar, like these social experiences, people have really latched onto them.
Yeah.
And, you know, like during the lockdown, there was all these promises of shopping in the metaverse or like digital or being online.
Digital, God, that word.
And you're like, well, where did that get us? But on like a kind of subcultural level, was a lot of moral surveillance in the last 8 to 10 years. That kind of explains the rise of people just wanting to be messy again, or like this Gen Z aesthetic coming back in, or even like brow or whatever. But I think people had this burnout of constantly monitoring themselves, self-surveillance, and just being too self-aware and too cognizant of how they're being perceived. And people just want to have moments where they can listen again and like switch off, and like it's kind of how we grew up.
Do you think that in part there's also this decentering of the individual, both as an individual audience member / user, but also as an artist? I mean, in some way these albums are both made with others, but Live at Café Oto is made at Café Oto.
Exactly.
It's like a jazz musician in like the 1950s or 60s going and you can play a jazz standard any number of ways. Every single time you perform it, it's different. But here you are taking like a snapshot of a certain social relation of your album as it's being received in the space. How do you think of what it is to produce an album? Maybe what it means to be part of a social body as opposed to making something in isolation. Like think of the Madonna album in the 90s where everything's super perfectly produced, right? Even like Charlie's Brat is messy in ways.
Like when I released Re-Engineering, even like a while ago in like 2013 as Heat Sick, I had a discussion then about like what's the function of an album, you know, like do people even still listen to albums? They kind of make playlists or they just listen to the odd track, or it's like, that was already like a conversation about it being more like algorithmic or whatever. And people making albums now, it is a bit more of a conscious decision of like, what do you want to put out and how do you want it to be received? Because I feel like people do value, again, an album. I mean, a lot of that is about like value, you know. In terms
what is
of
an album to you? Like I think about like, sorry to bring in Kanye West to this, but like Ye's Vultures, which is just this sprawling album that was released and then not released and then released and changed. And what is in your mind when you say people want an album again? What are you speaking about? A certain number of tracks that are all in the same world? How do you containerize that, considering we don't really need that container anymore?
I guess I think about it in terms of performance. You know, a performance has a duration, a film has a duration. It might just be a kind of coping mechanism to deal with the passing of time. Everything is constantly unfolding and unraveling in real time. I think it's actually quite important to think about like markers, you know, like how can I navigate myself through the world?
But an album versus a single, for instance, you need a certain duration in order to build the world in the listener's mind, or like...
I mean, to get one example, I guess, maybe it's been a bit trite, but you know, it's like Pink Pantheress came up through TikTok, and like she would just constantly re-edit her works for this like 2-minute marker or like 30-second. It was like very impromptu in terms of how that affected how the work was made and how the song would constantly be reworked. And when I did a live album, it was like actually reworkings of the previous 2 Steven Warwick albums, and just deliberately not like remixing yourself, but allowing yourself to like think about improvisation across time.
I feel like everyone should know, we'll drop in some clips or whatever, but hearing, seeing, experiencing you live, it's a full body experience. You're very physical in your performance. And I feel like I want to like drop in the clip of Naughty, 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 which we play for Coco all the time.
That was a good example, you know.
Naughty, naughty, naughty. You've been naughty, naughty, naughty. I don't know what it means.
I mean, it would be interesting also to hear you do a studio album now, but the improvisation vector feels like very core Steven.
But I also think it's interesting. First of all, I constantly crave new albums, and I think of it as a way to kind of reclaim your time or get rid of the labor of navigating which songs to play and this kind of choice paralysis. It's
That's
like
true.
by this upfront forcing yourself to committing to a duration longer than 3 minutes, it's also freeing in a way. And I think that's
a great point. I totally agree with
I think
that.
that's tied to why there's interest again in vinyl or cassette tapes, right? Where there's this disincentive to skip around and change the songs. I mean, also the live album it's 2 25-minute long tracks, right? So you don't even have the option to like jump around, right? And so I think, so much of online media is all about the hook, like can you grab them in the first 5 seconds, 10 seconds to hold them for another, 20 more seconds to 3 more minutes? If you abandon that and instead of it doing all the work in that first few seconds, if you do the work in the first short period of time, then you're freed as a result and you can have kind of a different relationship with that music. I mean, of course, it's not like all of the market feels this way, but the people who do, I feel like that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it relates to this function of switching off. And a good analogy could be like if you're DJing and you don't take requests, first to like, who's going to grab the aux cord at a party? And like everyone's like, oh, I got this on. And you're like, no, like, I just want to let something actually flow instead of it just being constantly disruptive. Also, like one of the functions of music is to just switch off or have something collective or communal, for want of better words, but just to allow something to unfold in time in a space. It's kind of funny when you think about this optimization of albums of like, I was listening to a hip hop record today and like, there's all these like skits on it. And you're like, how would that track now? Because like, it would be viewed in terms of metrics as unnecessary.
Right.
And it's also very like theatrical or choreographed. Actually, I really missed that aspect. It's just like a breather, that's kind of its function. And in terms of when I was conceiving, releasing a new album, like a live album, it was, like I've played live a lot. And like when I play live, it's quite wildly improvisational. And it's very much about deviating from the original track or whatever. And I'd always conceived of like when I did Heatsick or something, it was me synthesizing or appropriating this idea of DJ remixing, but with like guitar pedals. And like also this idea of disco or something had all of these brass instruments and like real instruments or whatever. And then you'd have house, which sampled it. And then you'd have very expensive equipment in early dance culture, samplers, synthesizers, they cost like thousands.
Totally.
And I wanted to kind of appropriate or copy that sound, but with the cheapest equipment possible. One, because it felt a bit strange, like carnivalesque kind of dare, like you're a plate spinner. But then also just this whole thing of like, can you pass? Can you get away with it? And you kind of could. Like, I remember when I played at Panorama Bar for the first time in like 2010, and there's all these DJ heads I'm friends with, and they'd be like, wow, this drum machine sounds like a Linn drum. And I was like, well, guess what? It's like a Casio touchpad, which I'm doing with my hands. But I've always found that very liberating in terms of you can get the same effect. You don't have to have really flashy equipment.
Yeah.
And that you can just move a room. I mean, that's always what I found really great about music. It was very participatory and it was very immediate. And like, when I'd been in art school, I just was like, God, everything's like a bit more stiff, Can we just get a quick Steven Warwick history? Earlier, you just told me like the first album you ever bought was Madonna's Vogue. But what's the quick trajectory? What's your self-mythology at this point? We all have one. I guess I encountered rave and early house through school discos when you were like 8 or 9 years old. I still have very vivid memories of, getting like Panda Pops or like these soft drinks and you just go mental and you just dance. And then like, I remember the next day you'd have the school assembly in the same room, but it's like the night after. And the room was like really sticky and you had to like sit on it. But you kind of were like, it doesn't matter. And like your like outfit was covered in gelatinous sugar. But it was like a great marker of like fun night, And like, I just remember.
Wait, that's like a literal candy rave.
A literal candy rave. Yeah. But like, I remember when all those early dance songs became mainstream, they were everywhere. And I love like the Chicago stuff or whatever. But like
that was what was played at your school dance?
Yeah, you'd have some popular versions of Chicago stuff, like Big Fun or something.
Right.
Like that or Good Life. Like,
but it's so funny compared to the States where like all school parties, there are people looking out for grinding. right? Or freak dancing, right?
It's like,
It's like on the news.
That's right.
A school says there is something wrong with a little bump and grind. Mount Lebanon is now enforcing a no grinding policy at its schools.
It's just going to be tough to dance, really, because it's pretty much the only way I know how to dance.
Everyone does it, and whoever goes to dance knows that there's going to be grinding there, so if they don't like it, they shouldn't go.
It's like it was every 7th grader was just like giving each other standing lap dances, basically, in the United States, the DMX or something.
But yeah, like, I mean, the other thing growing up was that, you would just listen to Radio 1 and like you had insane access to really weird stuff.
Yeah.
And like, I used to do my homework and then John Peel would be on and like,
Oh, yeah.
You did like a lot of noise stuff. You just did everything basically. And it was, I think growing up around that, you were like, wow, like anything's possible kind of moment.
Yeah.
And then afterwards you'd have like the breeze block. It just got more and more dancey, but I always remember being at school and I left the radio on and I fell asleep. I mean, bear in mind, this is like BBC radio.
Right.
So it was kind of cool.
State radio.
But like basically they also had like proto Chris Morris stuff on, like Blue Jam.
Right.
And that was on before I knew who he was. And I just remember waking up in the middle of the night and there's this skit. And, he's like, I've always felt like I'm a child stuck inside an adult's body. So I actually had a child's penis surgically attached to my body. And then they'd be like, actually, like, if you want, I could get in there. And like, you'd hear this zip. He's like, there's the fella. And like, I woke up to that. And, I mean, obviously that wouldn't fly now, but it was just more like, can you imagine you fell asleep and you're a bit like in between states, shall we say? And then you would hear a skit and you're like, did I dream that? Like, what the hell is that? But like, I distinctly remember that and being like, what the hell is this? Yeah. And then like discovering Chris Morris much later. And then later on, I was going to like noise gigs and this drone improvised kind of music, which informed a lot of how I perform. But even then, like, you'd go to people's houses afterwards and they'd be playing like compact or basic channel. And like, it was just kind of like always there. Bearing in mind, you also had this like weird criminal justice bill around the time of the raves. So it was illegal to make music with beats so that they didn't want people dancing in fields.
Right.
Wait, it was illegal to make music with beats outside?
To like publicly broadcast it. Basically, like they wanted to crack down on raves. So they made this very bureaucratically, legalistically worded law. And then that's around the time that Ortega and people like that would be like, fuck the criminal justice bill. Or like, the inside of that Jilted Generation by The Prodigy would have that. Like,
yeah.
It was very much referring to that. But it was almost...
What a beautiful problem to have, kids partying in fields.
Exactly. Anyway, I always struggled with this idea of... Did you have this? You probably didn't. Like in England, you have like Stars in Their Eyes. It was like a kind of celebrity impersonator. And it'd be like, tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be. And I just felt like that was a lot of, I studied this and I'm doing this and I'm going to perfectly remake it. I just felt like very like mannered and a bit like arslicker or something. I mean, I had the same problem when I came to Germany and there was this whole like art school system of Meisterschule, and it was like, people would just basically be like, oh, I studied with this person.
Kreber. Or
yeah. Right. And I was just like,
as though that's the past.
Yeah. And
because
I was like,
of it, you're...
Yeah. I was like, well, you're not that for association. It's like when like old money people talk and they'll be like, oh, well, I did that. Or my family did that.
Exactly like that.
Well, what did you do?
Right.
And then I was like, oh, is that your personality? Like who you studied with? That's your work? And I just always found that a bit baffling, to be quite honest with you. I mean, like in England as well, you had like the KLF or something. Like there was always a lot of like pranksters.
Yeah.
And like people just, there's always just kind of quite disruptive or like a bit anarchic. Or
do you think in part that was because the music at that time in the 90s and early aughts was still governed by a commercial system that had a certain way of valuing music, a certain commodity object form of music, and so it felt like there could be an underground in relation to that. It felt like there could be a culture that really resisted that because that was there.
You could also live on the dole back then, though, right?
That's true too.
You could easily live on the dole. Like Alexander McQueen was living on the dole when he was doing his collections. Like it was very common to be on the door.
And that was an
it's very
identity
easy.
in a way. I mean, some you chose, some you didn't chose. But in part, it was because there was this normative path and there was an industry around music. And so resisting it was an active choice. And now we're in a situation where that way of valuing music has more or less dissolved.
Exactly,
so it's like you can't be a counter to it in the same way.
But it's also just possible because you could live on the dole. Like you didn't have to have a job. You didn't. All of your money and free time didn't have to go to hustling to make money to not be evicted. I always think that's kind of the key.
But those are two things. Like one part of the identity of underground music or noise music or whatever was countering what was expected of you. And now, I mean, there is obviously a model. Like obviously there are acts that are very big that tour and have crazy ticket sales. But like just how has the formula changed now that that industry is less clear?
I mean, kind of goes without saying that like subculture died a long time ago, and then it got appropriated semiotically, and we all know that kind of stuff. What the question's really about is more like,
if you've made it this far, you already know New Models is for you. Subscribe now at newmodels.substack.com or patreon.com/newmodels for all of our full episodes and the hundreds more in our archive.